The kingdom did not fall asleep all at once. It faded, slowly and quietly, like a breath held too long. One morning the bells did not ring. Another day the river forgot how to sparkle. By the end of the year, even grief had grown tired, and the people moved like shadows rehearsing life rather than living it. And in the very heart of this forgotten land, beneath a sky that seemed permanently bruised with gray, a single girl stood at the gates of a palace sealed by silence, unaware that her smallest act of kindness would shake centuries of despair and wake an entire kingdom from its living death. Before the story carries you deeper into the sleeping kingdom, pause for a moment. If you believe that kindness still matters in a world that feels numb, if you believe second chances can change everything, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this survive because people like you choose to believe in them. Her name was Ilara. Though almost no one spoke names anymore, names felt useless when tomorrow looked exactly like yesterday. Ilara was not a princess, nor a knight, nor someone the old songs would have remembered. She was the daughter of a baker who baked bread no one tasted, in a town where hunger had become a quiet companion rather than an emergency. She had grown up in the aftertime, born years after the sleeping curse had settled over the land. For her, silence was normal. Gray skies were expected. Dreams were things whispered to children and quickly forgotten as they learned better. Yet even as a child, Lara carried something strange inside her, a warmth that did not match the cold world she lived in. It showed in the way she fed birds with crumbs she could barely spare, in the way she smiled at strangers who had forgotten how to smile back, and in the way she listened, really listened, when the elders spoke of the world before the sleep. The curse itself had no single beginning anyone could agree on. Some said it started with a broken promise between a king and the land. Others whispered about an ancient magic disturbed by greed. All that was certain was what remained of the palace sealed, the royal family locked in an eternal slumber, and the kingdom slowly losing its color, its ambition, its heartbeat. People still walked, worked, and aged, but nothing truly changed. Crops grew but tasted like dust. Children laughed but forgot the sound moments later. Love existed, but it felt then like a story told too many times without belief. The curse did not kill the kingdom. It simply convinced it to stop trying. Ilara's mother had died when Ilara was 12. Not from illness but from a quiet surrender that no healer could cure. Her father followed 2 winters later, leaving Lara alone with an empty bakery in a town that barely noticed. Grief tried to hollow her out, but something stubborn resisted. She cried. She starved. She nearly gave up. Yet every morning she opened the bakery door, kneaded the dough, and lit the oven even when no one came. It was not hope exactly. It was more like refusal. A refusal to let the world decide that this was all there would ever be. The palace stood at the edge of the capital like a fossilized dream. Its towers were intact, its gates unbroken, but ivy crept over marble like veins reclaiming a body. Guards still stood watch, not because anyone believed the royal family would wake, but because tradition was the last thing the curse had not taken. Ilara passed the palace often when delivering bread to the capital, feeling a strange pull every time. It was not fear but recognition, as if something inside her knew that whatever was wrong with the kingdom had a center, and that center lay behind those gates. The elders warned against curiosity. They said the palace was dangerous, that lingering near it drained the spirit. But Ilara noticed something else. When she stood close, she felt warmer, more alive, as if the air itself was remembering how to breathe. One evening, after a day of selling almost nothing and feeling the weight of loneliness press harder than usual, she followed that feeling. She walked past the outer gates, past the guards who barely looked at her, and into the palace gardens that had not been tended in decades. The gardens were frozen in unfinished beauty. Roses bloomed but never wilted. Fountains held water that never rippled. Statues of dancers looked mid-step, caught between movement and stillness. It felt wrong and beautiful all at once. Ilara wandered until she reached the palace doors, massive and carved with stories no one remembered any more. She did not know what she expected. She only knew that turning away felt like another kind of death. Getting inside was easier than any legend suggested. The doors were not locked. They had simply not been opened in a very long time. Inside, the palace smelled of dust and old flowers. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating corridors lined with sleeping figures, servants frozen mid-step, nobles' court in half-bows, guards leaning on spears that had not fallen. It was like walking through a memory that refused to end. Ilara's heart pounded, not with fear, but with sorrow so deep it made her chest ache. These people were alive, yet not living, and so, she realized with the jolt, was the kingdom beyond these walls. She wandered deeper, guided by instinct rather than reason, until she reached the royal chambers. There, on a bed draped in faded silk, lay the prince. He did not look powerful or heroic. He looked young, almost fragile, with lashes resting against pale skin and a hand curled loosely as if he had fallen asleep in the middle of reaching for something. This was the heart of the curse, she understood. Not the prince himself, but what he represented. A future paused, a promise left unfinished. Ilara had heard the stories. A true love's kiss would break the spell. A blade forged in dragon fire could shatter the magic. A sacrifice of royal blood was required. All the old solutions had failed, attempted by heroes who wanted glory, by nobles who wanted power, by scholars who wanted answers. Ilara wanted none of those things. She only wanted the ache to stop, the numbness to end, the world to feel alive again. She approached the bed slowly, aware of how foolish it seemed. She was no one. She had no magic, no royal blood, no grand destiny whispered at her birth. She only had a lifetime of quiet kindness and an exhaustion that came from loving a world that refused to love back. She leaned down, not with expectation, but with tenderness, and pressed a gentle kiss to the prince's forehead. Nothing happened for a moment. Shame flooded her. She had believed, just a little, that something might change. She pulled back, swallowing the sting of disappointment, and felt tears gather despite her effort to stay strong. But as she turned away, the air shifted. It was subtle, like the first sign of dawn after a long night. The prince's fingers twitched. A breath shuddered through his chest. Somewhere deep within the palace, something ancient cracked. The awakening was not instant. It was slow, like the kingdom itself had been slow to fall asleep. The prince's eyes opened, unfocused and confused, as if waking from a dream that had lasted a lifetime. Color seeped back into his skin. The room felt warmer, brighter, fuller. Ilara stumbled back, stunned, as the weight she had carried her entire life suddenly lifted just enough for her to notice. The palace responded first. Servants stirred, gasping and crying as years crashed into them all at once. Guards dropped their spears, overwhelmed by the sudden return of time. Outside, bells began to ring, not because someone had pulled the ropes, but because the metal itself seemed to remember its purpose. Across the kingdom, rivers rippled, leaves shook, and people looked up from their routines with confusion, and something long lost returned. The days that followed were chaotic and miraculous. The royal family awakened, aged but alive, carrying the guilt of centuries they had not lived. The curse unraveled not like a spell broken, but like a wound finally allowed to heal. Crops tasted sweet again. Children laughed and remembered. People argued, dreamed, failed, and tried again. Life rushed back in, messy and overwhelming and beautiful. Ilara did not become a heroine in the way stories usually demand. She did not wear crowns or command armies. She stood quietly at the edge of history, watching the world remember itself. The prince sought her out, not with promises or declarations, but with gratitude so deep it humbled them both. He wanted to understand how someone without power had done what centuries of power could not. Ilara had no answer that satisfied the scholars. She could only say that she had loved the kingdom even when it felt unlovable, and that sometimes love, when it is patient and unselfish, becomes a force stronger than magic. But awakening the kingdom did not mean erasing its scars. People struggled to adapt to change after so long without it. Some resented the return of responsibility. Others mourned the years they had lost. Ilara saw this and felt a familiar ache. Waking up, she realized, was only the beginning. Living was harder, so she stayed. She reopened her bakery, this time with laughter and warmth filling the air. She listened to stories of grief and hope alike. She reminded people, simply by being herself, that kindness was not a fairy tale solution but a daily choice. The prince, now king, tried to rebuild not just walls and roads, but trust. He made mistakes. He learned. He often sought Alara's counsel, not because she was wise in the traditional sense, but because she remembered what the kingdom felt like at its lowest. She had lived inside the curse and survived without becoming cruel. That, he realized, was a kind of wisdom no book could teach. Years passed. The story of the girl who kissed the sleeping kingdom awake spread beyond borders, embellished and reshaped with every telling. Some said she was chosen by fate. Others insisted she was magic herself. Ilara smiled at these stories and continued kneading dough, feeding birds, and listening. She knew the truth was simpler and harder. The kingdom had not needed a hero. It had needed someone who refused to give up on it. As time softened the sharpest edges of the past, Ilara sometimes returned to the palace gardens. Now alive with motion and sound, she would watch children play where statues once stood frozen, and feel a quiet pride not in what she had done, but in what everyone else was now doing. The kingdom was awake, but more importantly, it was choosing to stay awake. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you of the power of small acts and quiet courage, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and let us know in the comments how it made you feel. Your engagement keeps stories like this alive. And before this story ends, I have one special request. Please comment below with a single word that represents what you believe can wake a sleeping world. Kindness, love, courage, hope, or something uniquely your own. Because somewhere, in a world that feels tired and heavy, there may be a kingdom waiting not for a hero with a sword, but for someone like you, willing to offer warmth where there has only been silence.